Welcome to the Getting on Track online course. You will have been given this link to cover the course content for our 2 compulsory group sessions in preparation for bariatric surgery.
The content that will be covered includes general pathway overview and expectations of the team. We'll include your role in making surgery work and introduce the idea of surgery being a tool. We'll also look at influences on your food choices and discuss the golden rules in detail. We'll also introduce the topics of emotional eating, discuss the liver reduction diet and the texture progression for post-surgery. We'll also highlight some key messages that are relevant to all in relation to surgery. We would say keep an open mind with the content today, as some things will be more relevant than others. We'll just start now with a brief overview of the bariatric surgery pathway here at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. Having been referred into the service, you have had an initial appointment with the lead nurse, dietitian and psychologist. You will then have entered the STEPWISE Tier 3 programme where we focus on preparations for surgery. This involves group sessions and ongoing one-to-one appointments where we will assess your suitability and readiness for surgery. The time frame of the Tier 3 Stepwise programme is dependent on your body mass index or your BMI. If your BMI is less than 50, you'll be in this programme for 12 months. If it is over 50, or if you've completed your Tier 3 already before coming to Chelsea Westminster, or you are being worked up for a conversion, the time frame in this will be roughly 6 months from your initial appointment or until the team think you are ready to proceed. You'll be discussed by the entire team towards the end of these pathways and a decision will be made about your readiness for surgery. Once deemed ready, we will book you to see a surgeon, and if they are happy, you will be added to the waiting list. Currently, the waiting list is 9 to 12 months for a sleeve or bypass and around 2 to 3 months for a gastric band. The waiting list time is in addition to the time that you have spent in the Tier 3 programme and starts when you see the surgeon. After surgery, there will be a 3-year follow-up period where we can support you with the post-op diet and maintaining changes in the long term.
We will now clarify the expectations that the team have concerning your weight during the pre-op pathway. Our main expectation is that you are weight stable or showing some weight loss during the pathway. We are more interested in you developing skills and making sustainable behaviour changes rather than purely trying to lose as much weight as possible. This is more beneficial for long-term weight maintenance post-surgery. If you are taking on board the guidelines and adopting some new behaviours, then weight loss should be seen and will be beneficial for surgery. We don't expect large decreases in weight during the pathway, although some people do achieve this. If your weight falls off drastically, we will discuss with you whether you feel surgery is appropriate. Most people in this situation continue for surgery as they've had a yo-yo pattern to their weight loss and feel surgery is the tool that will help them to maintain weight in the long term. At a minimum, there should be weight stability during the pathway, but if you're gaining weight, we would be curious as to why this was so. If it's related to your compliance, we would be encouraging you and supporting you to get back on track with preparations and to stabilise your weight. We are aware that there are many factors influencing weight gain, from medication changes to injuries, and these will all be taken into account when looking at your weight. In general, the surgeon wouldn't be willing to see you if you've been gaining weight over the course of the pathway, as it could be an indication of poor engagement. A small proportion of patients may also be given a weight target prior to surgery, which we can support you with if this happens for you. To begin with, to get you ready for bariatric surgery, we're going to start by thinking about getting your head and stomach working together. Surgery works on your stomach and not on your mind, so it's not going to change what, when, or how you eat. You'll still have to be the one to make all of those decisions. And so, for you to achieve your weight loss goals and to make surgery a success, it's important to get your mind and stomach working together. Some examples of eating behaviours that are determined by the head that cause problems following surgery are irregular eating, so going for long periods of time without eating. On this pathway, we are expecting you to be eating regularly, so you need to be having breakfast, a mid-morning snack, lunch, a mid-afternoon snack, and an evening meal. Your stomach may not necessarily remind you when it's time to eat, so you need to be making this decision consciously. Some automatic eating habits and patterns, for example, eating in front of the TV, eating while you're working, etc., can cause difficulties post-surgery. It's also important that we tackle eating patterns like binge eating, emotional eating, and managing cravings for you to achieve the best results. Most of these habits and patterns are determined by our minds, so surgery on your stomach alone will not solve these problems.
This is a quote from a post-op patient, and we really feel like this sums up the process of bariatric surgery nicely. Weight loss surgery is an amazing tool, but it's a stomach surgery, not brain surgery. The stomach of an obese person is not diseased, and the surgery is not a cure. Rather, the surgery creates the opportunity to make the changes in your mind, your heart, and your habits that will lead to a new and healthier life. Unless you work with your brain and your heart and your soul, no stomach changing tool can work in the long term. Hopefully this meets with your expectations of bariatric surgery.
Another way to think about it is that surgery is a small part of a much longer process. You're now all in the preparation stage, where you'll be making dietary and behavioural changes, and this will take a number of months. Surgery itself is only approximately a 1 or 2 hour process. Then you will go into the post-op phase, where it's about maintenance of dietary and behavioural changes. The more you do in the preparation stage, the easier the post-op stage will be and the more effective surgery will be. Many people are very focused on the physical surgery itself and when this will happen, but this is actually a very small part of a much longer process, and a very important process.
It is useful for us to look at what the research tells us about who does best after surgery. People who do best after surgery adhere to the following. They have a routine and a regular meal pattern. They are able to monitor or keep track of their food intake. They do not experience binge or emotional or comfort eating, or they have the skills and strategies to manage these patterns of eating if they do occur. They have a consistent diet pattern. For example, their eating stays relatively the same over the course of weekdays, weekends, and special occasions. We also see those who are engaged in regular physical activity maintain their weight more effectively post-surgery. Lastly, their life is relatively stable and in a set routine and structure.
Being fully aware of your eating patterns and habits can give you the edge and the power that you need to change them. For some of you, monitoring or keeping track of what you're doing will show your areas of strength as well as the areas that need more attention so that you can get the best outcomes from surgery. For some of you, monitoring will give you a greater sense of control. Goals are important in preparing for surgery and adapting to life after surgery, and monitoring will help you with this. Also, we know from research that people who self-monitor are more likely to lose more weight than people who don't. So on average, using memory alone, people recall only 80% of the calories that they consume in a day. This is because people have busy lives, which means that they might not notice everything they consume. Sometimes people feel ashamed of what they consume, and then it becomes more difficult to recall what's been eaten. Also, some people just don't know how many calories are in certain foods, so this can be really difficult to monitor. We would recommend that everyone starts using a food diary to monitor progress going forward.
There are a number of ways to monitor your food. You can use traditional paper and pen diaries, but you could also take photos of your food on your phones, on apps, or on an Excel spreadsheet, or whatever suits you. You might want to monitor things other than food, so some ideas on things you might like to monitor are the frequency of meals, especially if you're trying to establish a regular meal pattern, snacking items, or portion sizes where photos can be useful. You might like to monitor emotional eating, or your alcohol intake, or specifically something like your fizzy drink consumption. We don't have to monitor everything, so you can be specific in the areas that you monitor and pick out the areas that you feel you need to work on.
Next, let's look at one of the fundamental principles of preparations for surgery, that is, regular eating. Hopefully this will help to explain why regular eating is so important. This graph shows the sort of eating routine we see regularly in clinic. This person has skipped their breakfast, perhaps just had a coffee, then not eaten until lunchtime, where they might have had a small lunch. Again, they missed their afternoon snacks, so their hunger has built up. This has then led to overeating in the evening, probably choosing high-calorie, high-energy foods and snacking throughout the evening. The problem with this is that when we skip meals, our body goes into semi-starvation mode. This means that because it does not know when it's next going to get food, it protects the body by not using as much energy. So we can often think that skipping meals is helpful for weight loss, but actually it has the opposite effect and can cause us to gain weight. By eating regularly, our body knows to anticipate food and will raise your metabolism. If you eat regularly, you have a safety net that makes you less likely to experience cravings, binges, and to make impulsive food choices. You'll be eating according to the regular plan you've developed, rather than in response to hunger or other feelings. You won't actually be eating more, but you'll be balancing out the amount of food that you eat in the evening better. Your body knows that it has a regular food source if you're eating regularly, and this can reduce binges. After surgery, eating regularly ensures you can meet your nutritional requirements, aid recovery, meet protein needs, reduce muscle loss, and help with weight maintenance. If eating regularly is something that you want to work on, first decide when you want to eat, and then we can help you focus on what to eat. We want you to be eating something every 3 to 4 hours to optimize your metabolism.
This is another way of looking at the effects of not having a regular eating pattern. So this is the vicious cycle where you skip a meal, resulting in your hunger building. You'll overeat in the evening, feel very full, and then you'll skip meals the next day, such as breakfast, and you'll start that cycle again. We need to be looking for ways to break free of this cycle if this relates to you.
So, looking at the barriers to regular eating, some examples are having busy working schedules, not being hungry, being too busy to eat regularly, having children and prioritizing their needs, or you just maybe have never had it before. If any of these are barriers preventing you from eating regularly, think about how you can start to overcome them. Can you plan your meals in advance? Can you bring a packed lunch to work with you? Can your family eat the same meal as you at the same times? Some of these strategies will work for you, while others will not. Have a think about possible solutions, and we can discuss other options in your individual appointments if you're struggling with barriers.
Next, we're going to look at being aware of your food choices. Eating without awareness can lead to eating more than you realise, and that is why we want to be aware of our food choices. By changing your personal environment, you can change your eating behaviour.
So linking that in, do we eat with our eyes or with our stomach? This is an interesting question, and it has been the topic of a lot of research. So one example of such research is a study that compared the amount of soup people ate from normal bowls versus those that were bottomless. So comparing normal bowls to bowls that were constantly being refilled without the participants' knowledge.
What do you think they found in terms of who ate the most? What they found from the research was that people who unknowingly ate from the bottomless bowls ate 73% more soup. But interestingly, they did not believe that they had eaten more or rated themselves as more full than those eating from the normal bowls. What this research indicates is that just relying on visual cues to tell us when we should stop eating can cause us to overeat. So we cannot rely on this cue alone. One strategy that we have is to change our personal environments. By changing our environments, we can change our eating behaviour.
So, how do we create a food environment that helps us to stay on track? Well, our food environments, like our kitchens and living rooms and offices, can really trip us up when it comes to our weight loss goals. While it's natural to choose convenience foods in our busy lives, it tends to be that the more convenient food is, typically, the more we will eat of it. And then conversely, the more hassle it is, the less we actually eat. So, to illustrate the impact of convenience on our eating with an example, there was a study that was conducted where secretaries were given 3 glass jars with 30 sweets in them, and these jars were placed either on top of their desk, in their desk drawer, or 6 feet away from their desks. When the secretaries were left to their own devices, the situation in which the greatest number of sweets were eaten was when the jar was on the desk. The secretaries ate around 9 sweets in this instance, so an extra 225 calories per day, whereas when they were in the drawer, only 6 sweets were eaten, and only 4 sweets were eaten when the jar was 6 feet away. This example just shows the impact of having foods that are easily accessible on your eating behaviours.
Some more examples of how your food environment can influence your food choices are, for example, people who leave cereal on the worktop typically weigh 2 stone more than people who don't. And when you put serving dishes on the table, people tend to eat 20% more food than if the food was served straight from the oven. So some ideas to overcome this are to leave workplaces uncluttered. For example, the only food on the counter should be a fruit bowl. You could keep healthy snacks easily accessible. Also, you can try to leave the room when doing things like boiling the kettle to avoid snacking whilst you are waiting. Or try to put tempting foods in cupboards or out of reach areas to try the out of sight, out of mind theory. We would really encourage you all to have a look around your kitchens to see if there is anything that you could change to help you with your weight loss.
Now, we're going to spend some time looking at paired associations. Over time, we start to link certain situations with food. So for example, when we're watching TV, we might always have a snack. These links between situations and foods develop over time and get stronger and stronger until they become automatic or habitual. So the second we start to watch TV without even thinking, we'll have a snack automatically. Some examples of paired associations could be going to the cinema and always having to have popcorn, having snacks while you watch TV, as I said, having a biscuit with hot drinks, and a lot of other examples that you might be thinking of yourself. But importantly, once we're aware of these situations or paired associations, it becomes easier to break these habits. I think it would be helpful if you could have a think about any situations that you might pair with food and ask yourself why. What does that association do for you? Does it act as a distraction maybe? Source of comfort? Once we are aware of the associations, they become easier to break and manage. It might even be an idea to take a list of paired associations to your appointments with us to discuss how we can break these.
We are now going to have a think about emotional eating. While maybe not everybody relates to this eating pattern, there might be some information in this section that you find helpful. So I would encourage you to keep an open mind as we run through these details. To begin with, we're going to have a think about the differences between physical hunger and emotional hunger.
So sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger. So ways of recognizing physical hunger or stomach hunger are that it builds gradually. It's physical sensations that are happening below the neck, for example, a growling stomach. It happens many hours after a meal. It goes away when you feel full, and then eating leads to feeling satisfied. Whereas with emotional hunger or head hunger, it's hunger that develops suddenly. It's above the neck, so you might just suddenly get a taste for something sweet like ice cream. It's not connected to the time of the meal. It stays with you even though you're full, and then eating can lead to feelings of guilt and shame.
Looking at this further, people can find that they get trapped into a bit of a vicious cycle of emotional eating, and this is illustrated on this slide. To begin with, when we emotionally eat, it is normally triggered by some sort of situation, for example, having an argument with our families. We've used the example of an argument here, but these triggers can of course be anything. So we have an argument, and this causes us to have thoughts like, I'm not good enough, which lead to feelings of anger or sadness possibly. So to get rid of these feelings, maybe to numb them or distract ourselves from them, we do something. We eat to make ourselves feel better. But then we might have some sort of response in our bodies, like feelings of heaviness because we've eaten when we weren't hungry, or because we know we shouldn't have eaten, we start to have more thoughts like, I'm not good enough. These thoughts can lead to feelings or emotions of anger or sadness. So we eat to get rid of these feelings and we get trapped in that vicious cycle. A lot of times people think you can only emotionally eat in response to a negative emotion, but that's not the case. Take, for example, the situation of having a promotion at work. This might lead to thoughts like, I am good enough, feelings of happiness. So you do something to maintain or perpetuate this happiness, so you eat. But then, because you might not have been hungry in the first place, you could feel heaviness over the body again, which might lead to thoughts of regret and feelings like guilt. You're again then getting trapped in the vicious cycle in that way. Think about this vicious cycle and whether it relates to yourself going forwards.
So what we want is for you to start becoming your own food detective and think about what triggers your eating. Your triggers could be an emotion you experience, like stress, sadness, loneliness, boredom, or as a reward to yourself. Or it could be certain situations like being home alone, watching TV, eating while you're cooking, or after having an argument. It could be social events like going out for a meal, a celebration of some kind, drinking alcohol, or it could be certain times of the day like evenings or mid-afternoon. And finally, it could be physical feelings like being tired or hungry or hormonal that can trigger your emotional eating. So have a think about those examples and try to identify any triggers that are specific to you.
When we experience an emotion, it can be helpful also to think about what that emotion is telling you. I suppose emotions like stress and anger are very broad terms, and it can be helpful to break them down into what those emotions are actually telling us and what thoughts are behind them. Take, for example, stress. The thought behind this emotion is that we are feeling overwhelmed, like we cannot cope with the demands that are being placed on us. With boredom, what we're really saying is that we are in need of mental stimulation. When we feel lonely, what we are thinking is that we feel alone and want company. Or when we are angry, what we are thinking is that a situation is unfair or is unjust. Once we know more about what the emotion is telling us, we can better understand how to manage it. Also, it can be helpful to ask the question, does food help with this? For example, can food make a situation more fair or more just? Can food take away some of the demands that are being placed on us so that we feel less overwhelmed? More often than not, the answer is no.
The overall aim of what we're trying to do here is to increase your flexibility a bit. What we do not want is an automatic linear response when you experience an emotion and then immediately reach for food. Instead, we want you to experience a feeling, ask yourself what that feeling is telling you that you need, and then ask yourself what you can do to fulfill that need. One of the options for actions you will take will still be eating. It will always remain an option, but we want you to move away from this being the only option and to build up a repertoire of responses to choose from. Other examples of options that you can take are things like reading a book, going for a walk, writing in a diary, or something like that. But we want you to think about what the outcomes will be of each choice that you take. What is the outcome of eating versus taking a walk?
We're now just going to introduce the emotional eating curve. We've used stress as an example here, but it could be an emotion such as anger or boredom. And the red line there on the graph is your stress level. So at some point in our lives, we experienced a trigger and that led to our stress levels rising. It has then reached a peak and we've eaten some food and then experienced that our stress levels have reduced. By doing this, we form the belief that if I eat when I'm stressed, then my stress levels will reduce and I'll feel better.
Over time, we actually become de-skilled in tolerating stress, so that when we experience it, we start to eat earlier and earlier as we want to get rid of the feeling as quickly as possible, and we rely on the belief about the power of food sooner. But would this stress line change if we didn't eat?
The answer is no, it would actually look exactly the same. This is because all emotions come and go in waves. We cannot feel 100% of emotion 100% of the time. Whether we eat or not, our stress will still come down. So we can either try to distract ourselves so that we do not eat, or another option would be to just sit with and tolerate the emotion until it comes down on its own.
So, in summary, we want you to identify your emotional triggers and responses. So be your own food detective and name the feelings that you're experiencing. Learn to stay with your emotions and tolerate them, remembering that the feelings will eventually reduce on their own. Ask yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen if you stay with the feeling versus what's the worst thing that can happen if you eat? Think about what else you can do to deal with the underlying issue. So what can you do when you experience boredom, or what can you do to manage stress? Coming up with a bit of a plan in advance can really help you when you're faced with the challenge of emotional eating.
So for more information on emotional eating and other areas around psychological preparation for surgery, we're just going to refer you to this book, which is recently out from our very own clinical psychologist Denise Ratcliffe. It's going to help you prepare for surgery and make adjustments to life with bariatric surgery in the long term. And then the book's called, as you can see, Living with Bariatric Surgery. We will now turn our attention to the progression of topics in relation to your dietetic input. Initial focus will be on the quality of your dietary intake and starting to incorporate the golden rules. Topics such as the pre-op liver shrinkage diet and text progression post-surgery will be focused on once you've progressed with these first topics. We'll cover all of these topics in the next few sections to introduce you to them or build upon what you already know.
We will just spend a bit of time thinking in more detail about what influences us in trying to make healthy food choices. It's important for us to identify anything that could send us off track post-surgery that we need to work on now and develop ways to manage them. A useful question to ask yourself is what things have helped you stay on track or sent you off track in the past when trying to maintain healthy food choices. This should provide you with a range of influences that can be focused upon.
These are just some examples of areas that people have felt that have influenced their food choices. Knowledge level. Potentially not knowing what constitutes a healthy food choice, or even getting confused by all the mixed messages in the media around nutrition and dieting. So not really knowing what they should be doing to maintain a healthy intake. Shopping habits could also influence your food choice decisions, and this could be by being influenced in terms of how you shop, either positively or negatively. So things to think about here could be ideas around aisle avoidance in order to reduce high fat, high sugar items potentially. Some people have found it useful to shop online and to try and reduce that visibility and reduce the opportunity for impromptu purchases. Some people find if they go shopping with other people, they can be a positive influence and help them stick to their list. Others find that people can be a negative influence and actually make them go off track from what they've planned to be buying. Some people have also found if they don't go shopping when they're hungry, that they'll make better choices. And as mentioned, if you do make a list or make a plan, make sure that you're sticking to it. Also, it's really important to be aware of what the supermarkets are trying to do in terms of they are a business and they're trying to sell you things. So with offers such as the buy one get one free offers, they're really trying to entice you in to buy things that actually probably aren't the most suitable options. So again, sort of high fat, high sugar options. So another area could be work. Some people report that their work routines really influence their eating choices and habits. So for example, if you're a shift worker or a night worker, or if you don't have a lunch break, or even if there's lots of tempting foods at work on a regular basis, these are things that can potentially send you off track. Time pressure is another one. So if you feel you don't have enough time to be making your own meals at home, do you need to prioritise your time and plan more effectively potentially? Do you need to plan ahead to make time in your day in order to prioritise making meals in the evening, for example? Again, we mentioned about sort of how other people can be a positive or negative influence. So think about the influence maybe of your children or your partners, just generally. If you do feel the need to bring people along to appointments to help them support you better, that's definitely advisable. Having people on board who are in your sort of inner circle can be really useful to help you have other people understand what you're going through and help you in your home environment. As a minimum, definitely give them the literature to read through to help them understand what's being asked of you here. Another area could be cooking skills. Some people feel that their perceived lack of cooking skills means they can't eat healthy meals. Luckily, there's plenty of resources available nowadays, especially online, to help you improve your skills through things like online cooking lessons or short little cooking classes, and also cooking with friends. Involve your friends to help you if you feel that your knowledge or skill level is holding you back. Another area potentially could be eating out regularly or having a high level of takeaways in your intake. So you could ask yourself if you rely on takeaways a lot in your regular diet. So, for example, someone previously who was on the pathway identified that they did have a high amount of takeaways in their intake and started to plan their meals on a whiteboard in their kitchen, and this helped them be more organised, but also they kept a tally of how much money they were saving through not having the takeaway meals. That was an added sort of motivational aspect to help them keep on track. Cost also is one aspect where people can find, or the perceived cost, people can find this limits them in terms of thinking that it's going to cost me more to eat healthily. Eating healthy does not need to be an expensive method of eating, and it can be achieved on a tight budget. So if you're thinking about the basic things like meal planning, your shopping habits, cooking methods, researching cost-saving ideas, all these sort of things can be incorporated into your routines to cumulatively make a difference overall. Consider whether looking at your budget as a whole would help as well, so not just your food budget. If you're feeling, are you prioritizing your spending? If you feeling that, are you putting enough priority on your food spending, basically? And lastly, if you think about your environment, we touched on it a little bit earlier. Our society can influence how we eat. So think about your local area, maybe places that you visit regularly or at work, maybe even the gym, and think how maybe they're set up to negatively influence your food choices. So a good one is always an example of vending machines at gyms, or if there's fast food outlets at work. And these sort of things are going to be more likely to influence your food choices if they weren't there, for example. Can you think of any other examples that are specific to yourself? So you use your knowledge from past experiences and think about any diets that you've done in the past that might help identify any other areas that could be influential in your life. Also keep in mind that these elements and changes around making healthy food choices are for life. They're not short-term nor sort of fad-style ideas. They're going to help you work alongside the golden rules and maintain your weight long-term post-surgery.
So we'll just briefly focus on the area of knowledge, specifically food labelling, to help you with your food choices. It's important to read food or drink labels to help identify the quality of the item. Some of you may already read labels regularly, which is great, as items that are too high in sugar could trigger the dumping syndrome after surgery, and also limit weight loss or maintenance generally. We will be discussing the dumping syndrome at a later date. The traffic light system is a widely used method for food labelling. Basically, with high levels being identified with the colour red, medium levels with yellow, and low levels with green. We're aiming to have as much green as possible on these label readings. This is useful as you do not need to know any figures or cutoff points, just the colours. One thing to be aware of is how much of the portion is the label relating to. Not all labels will have the colour coding system on them. To help with this, we can give you a label reading card during your one-to-one appointments that will turn these labels back into the colour-coded system for you.
So to demonstrate the importance of label reading, we're just going to have a look at the amount of sugar that are in some common available drinks. And we'll also link that into the dumping syndrome shortly as well. So hopefully tie that into why it's important for after surgery. So initially just consider that the recommended allowance for added sugar for adults in a day is around 30 grams or roughly 6 teaspoons. So can you guess how much sugar is in this bottle of flavoured water? So it's 500 millilitres. So the answer is 25 grams of added sugar. So that's almost your whole daily allowance in one 500 ml bottle of water. So for some of you that might be quite surprising, others you may already be aware of that, but you're not going to know unless you've checked the label. So this is really to get you thinking not to take things on face value. Obviously a bottle of water, you might think that's going to be fine, but checking the label you'd have seen that that's got a very high level of added sugar in there. So once identified as being high in sugar, what can we do? We're looking to swap these items out for something that is low in sugar, so green on the label reader. So it doesn't mean you have to eliminate these items from your intake, more think about what can you swap them to that's still going to allow you to have these items but not be high in sugar. So this could mean, for this example, you're having a sweetened drink, so with sweetener rather than using sugar, and they're freely available. Definitely a lot of patients will use their own sort of diffuser bottles, so you can put your own fruit in it and make it at home. So that's just 2 examples, but we'd encourage you to start reading labels if you're not doing so at the moment, as it's definitely a skill that you're going to need post-surgery to help you tolerate your food.
So moving on now from looking at influences on your food choices, we're going to briefly think about the guidelines around your mealtime plate portions. Can you identify the 3 main elements of your meals? They are vegetables, so using a wide variety of different coloured vegetables. Protein, so using lean meat, fish, beans, pulses, and dairy. And finally, carbohydrates, rice, pasta, ideally whole grain, potatoes, and bread. This is the plate model we would encourage you to use pre-surgery as an aid for weight maintenance or weight loss. So what do you need to do to achieve the above portion balance? Some of you may need to reduce your carbohydrates and increase your vegetables. Have a good think about what vegetable options you would be more likely to be able to increase and try to start including them in your meals. As you progress through the pathway, we will also get you to start thinking about the order in which you eat your food. We will introduce the protein first message later on.
Okay, so we're now going to turn our attention to the golden rules. So hopefully you'll all have been introduced to these at your initial appointment and you'll be well on your way to becoming an expert about them now. This will hopefully just add on some more information about the golden rules to what you already know. So you'll need to be doing these things lifelong after surgery in order to work alongside the surgery, tolerate your food, and ultimately achieve weight maintenance in the longer term. As part of the pathway towards surgery, you'll need to start incorporating the golden rules into your routines in order to make them habitual. We'll be assessing you in your one-to-one appointments to see how well you are progressing with these. You should aim to identify which golden rules are not currently in your habits and try and start working on them one by one. And that's going to be different for everybody. Some people will already be eating regularly and therefore they can focus on one of the other golden rules first. If you're not eating regularly, we'd probably say make that your first element to focus in on. So why is regular eating so important? We'll look at that first. Obviously, you've probably heard that message before about eating regularly, but it is very important if we're thinking about bariatric surgery in the longer term afterwards. So we've already discussed that quite a bit earlier on. But just to add on about the importance of a post-surgery, if you're not eating regularly, you're really not going to be able to do as well with either your weight loss or maintaining your weight in the long term after surgery. You're probably going to find that you're using your lean tissue much more than you would be if you were eating regularly, and that's because you're able to maintain your protein intake by having that regular small amounts throughout the day. So it's going to be something that if you're not doing, we're going to really make sure that is ingrained pre-surgery, really break down any barriers behind it to make sure that we've eliminated the chance of skipping meals or going for extra long stretches through the day without having any intake. So we'll just then look at eating slowly. So the guidelines are trying to have your meals last around 20 minutes. Why is that? So that's going to give your brain time to take in all the information that your body is sending it, all the messages and hormone information that's going to your brain. It takes around 20 minutes for your brain really to process that. So it's going to help you avoid taking on too much too quickly and really increase the satisfaction levels that you get from food. Then we're looking at small bites, so that's the size of your thumbnail or even a 20p piece. Again, this will help you to reduce the chance of taking too much food in too quickly and overloading the system. So if you think very crudely that your body is like a funnel after surgery, if you're taking on too much too quickly, that funnel is going to overload. So that's kind of a bit of an analogy which will help hopefully emphasize the reason why you need to eat slowly and have small bites. Also then chewing well ties into that nicely as well. So chewing well, we're looking for 20 times or until the food is mushy. So that's obviously going to depend on the food at the start. But what you want to make sure is that you're not just having a few chews and swallowing. So your body after surgery is going to need a helping hand really to get things into that well digested state, because it's not going to spend as long in the stomach if you're having a sleeve or bypass. It's going to end up in the small intestine in a less digested state. So we need to make sure we're getting as much absorption from the food as possible through chewing well. And that mechanism of chewing is going to incorporate, linking that brain, as we said earlier, making the brain and body working together, getting that information going to the brain to help you feel satisfied from your food. Also, if you're not chewing that well after surgery, you're more likely going to be uncomfortable and experience intolerance issues, which really you're going to be wanting to avoid.
So the next golden rule is using small plates or cutlery. So using a side plate, for example. This will help with portion control and will also control the size of your bites. Some people use the bariatric plate, which you can buy online at different websites. So just ask the dietitians for more information with that. The next golden rule is avoiding drinking and eating at the same time. So we recommend leaving 10 minutes before your meal and 30 minutes afterwards. This will help you avoid vomiting or being very uncomfortable after you eat, and also reduce the effects of food travelling through your system faster. So the next one is to avoid high-calorie fluids. These can provide you with unnecessary energy preoperatively and likely lead to the dumping syndrome after surgery. We also recommend that you avoid any carbonated fluids, even if it's water, so anything with bubbles will be difficult to tolerate post-surgery. The next golden rule is to stop eating as soon as you feel satisfied. So by doing this, it will ensure that you're not overeating, you're eating slowly, and you're also just listening to your body. These are all great skills to have after surgery. The next one is avoiding distractions around meal times. So by avoiding distractions, you're going to help to establish and maintain the golden rules, and by following the golden rules, you're going to help with the tolerance of foods. Finally, exercising regularly is a golden rule. So what the research shows us is that people who exercise regularly post-operatively are more likely to be maintaining weight. Exercise will also improve muscle mass and tone. So focus on reducing sedentary behaviours and implementing regular bouts of moderate level activity. So by moderate level activity, we mean when your heart rate is raised so you could talk, but you couldn't sing. We're ultimately looking for 60 to 90 minutes per day of moderate activity, but it's important to start gradually and work within any current limitations that you have. We will assess how you're progressing with these in your one-to-one appointments and support you if you're struggling. You will need to establish these habits in order to progress on the pathway.
Okay, so we're just going to now move on to a different topic and look at the liver shrinkage diet. This applies to the preceding weeks before your surgery date. There's a need to follow a specific diet to make sure that the liver is shrunk accordingly, and that is because most people will find that the livers are in an enlarged state. They might have a fatty liver, and that's going to hamper the ability of the surgeon to move that liver out of the way and proceed with the surgery. So with all the surgeries, this is required, and it's going to be a low-calorie, low-carbohydrate diet. So it's generally for around 2 weeks before surgery. It may be a little bit longer if the surgeon has requested this. Due to the position of the liver sitting over the top of the stomach, the surgeon said needs to move the liver out of the way and hold it out of position during surgery.
Here we can see on the left-hand side a photo of an enlarged liver with fatty deposits. The yellow material in the photo is intra-abdominal fat. The right-hand photo, on the other hand, is a clear liver after the liver reduction diet. The liver will be flexible and floppy with a clear edge, and this allows the surgeon to delicately move it out of position. You may also notice the reduced amount of intra-abdominal fat, which will help the surgeon with access.
So how is it undertaken? So at Chelsea and Westminster here we use a couple of main options. One of them is a food plan, and the others is a meal replacement shake option. So as mentioned, it's a low calorie, low carbohydrate diet, and it will last for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer if the surgeon requests. So the first method with the food plan or the second method with the meal replacement shakes will both achieve the desired reduction in liver shrinkage if adhered to. Which one you choose depends on what you think will best suit you and really links into your previous experience. So if you've had good experience with meal replacement shakes in the past, you might want to give those a go first. Or if you'd miss the element of eating food, then you'd probably want to try the food plan first. We'll recommend a 1 week trial for everybody. So it doesn't matter what surgery you're having, you're required to do a trial. That's needed to prepare you for what's ahead and ensuring you have thought about any areas you might want to change for next time. So you ironed out anything that could potentially send you off track. It's going to give you that opportunity to reflect on what went well or what made it harder. Also, some people might like to repeat the trial as they go through the pathway or try the alternative option if they feel that the first one was a bit of a struggle.
So it's important to consider what would happen if you did not complete the liver reduction properly. So there would likely be less liver shrinkage and intra-abdominal fat loss, meaning surgery may be harder and take longer, resulting in more time under anaesthetic. The surgeon may decide that it is unsafe to continue due to a risk of bleeding and damage to the liver or surrounding organs. The surgeon would not know this until they start surgery, as a scan wouldn't be a reliable indicator. This would be distressing, a waste of your time and energy, a waste of the NHS resources, and likely mean waiting again for another surgery date. Overall, weight loss can generally be a good indicator of how well you have adhered to the diet, but this will be variable from person to person.
Okay, so that's an introduction to the liver reduction diet. We'll just think now about what you need to be doing to prepare for this ahead of time. So if you haven't started to think about this yet, make sure you've read the literature that you should have been given at your initial appointment. And then once you've discussed this with the dietitian in your next dietitian appointment, that's when you can think about starting a trial. So if you haven't discussed it with a dietitian yet, don't start a trial. Speak to them at your next appointment and they can plan out when that should be.
We're now going to think about what happens in the immediate few weeks after surgery. So in order to allow your body to heal and recover properly, there's a period of texture progression required after surgery. You wouldn't be able to go straight into eating solid foods, as this will put your surgery under pressure and increase risk of leaks and post-surgery tolerance complications. The texture progression phases are the liquid phase, the puree phase, soft phase, and solid phase. We're now going to go into these phases in a little bit more detail.
Okay, so looking at the first phase, which is fluids only, that means any liquid that is not thicker than milk and has no lumps or bits. It will last for the first 10 days after surgery if you've had a sleeve or bypass, and then the first 7 days if you've had a band, as that is less invasive and needs less recovery time. So what options do you have for the fluid phase? They include thin soups, herbal or fruit teas, teas and coffees are okay, diluted fruit juices, vegetable juices, and protein shakes. Water, milk of the skimmed variety, and sugar-free squash or sugar-free jelly are also absolutely fine. In terms of the protein shake, we'll give you details of which ones to be using after surgery and encourage you to be identifying which one you plan to use. And we'll talk about protein in a bit more detail and why we're asking protein shakes to be included in your intake. So some other points to remember about the fluid phase are, we'll start talking in cup volumes after surgery. So making sure that you're keeping hydrated is one of the main aims of the initial few days after surgery. So we'll give you a target of having half a cup per half an hour of any of those fluids. So this allows for sort of small sips, slow sips, and making sure that you're not taking on too much too quickly and overloading the system whilst everything's trying to heal up. Avoiding fizzy drinks, obviously one of the golden rules. So as detailed, your body won't be able to tolerate these very well. And also making sure that you're getting near to around 1500 millilitres over the course of a day by having that half a cup every half an hour.
So we will provide you with the details of when to start and stop each phase. So the second phase is the puree phase, which means that most things have to go through a blender. So a good rule of thumb when you're in this phase is if you can pour it, then it's okay to eat. If you've had a sleeve or bypass, this will be undertaken for 28 days and only 7 days for band patients. Some things to consider when you're on the puree diet phase is that the consistency needs to be smooth like a paste with no lumps or bits in it. The volume of a portion will be about half a cup to 3/4 of a cup, or 125 millilitres to 190 millilitres. Half of this portion will be made up of protein. You'll need to be having the protein option first and separate from the other options in case you are unable to finish the total portion and avoid leaving any protein. Another thing to consider is making sure you have enough high protein options as your snack items. Ensure a protein shake is being taken 2 to 3 times per day as well. You'll need to be blending a lot of food, so you will need a blender at home.
So the third phase that you'll be in after surgery is the soft diet phase. So this will last for 2 weeks for both sleeve and bypass, but also the band. But obviously the band patients are slightly ahead in time, having shorter time period on the first 2 phases. So what do you mean by soft options? So things that are fork mashable. So as long as you can squash it with a fork, then that's okay. That's the rule of thumb. If you can't squash it, then don't have it. So the structure of the day is the same as in the puree phase. So you have that breakfast, lunch and dinner, and then the 2 snacks in between, which would be high protein snacks. Still having your 2 to 3 servings of your protein shake a day, and meeting your fluid requirements, trying to get close to 1500 mils to litres in total. In terms of individual portions, you should be looking to have between 3/4 to a cup in size, or around 190 to 250 millilitres. Still doing the same things with the protein as with the puree phase, so having half your portion protein, your protein first, and really it's about establishing that routine, sticking with the consistency, even if you're feeling that you're ready to progress onto solids, maintaining that period fully on soft to make sure your body's ready and healed properly to progress.
So the time frame for the texture progression after surgery is 4 weeks for gastric band patients and 8 weeks for sleeve or bypass patients. This length of time may be longer for some people, but never shorter than these periods. You will have a dietitian appointment towards the end of your texture progression to help with transition to the regular phase. It's important to focus on following dietary recommendations of quality, routine, and the golden rules. Also, being aware of what the caution foods are, so refer to your handout from your initial assessment for these, and think about how to troubleshoot tolerance problems. Once you've discussed this with your dietitian pre-surgery, you can think about the following items to help you prepare. So practicing options from the different phases, especially the puree phase, as people might not be used to this texture. Buy a blender if you don't have one already, or borrow it off a friend. Identify which protein shake you intend to use. Once you have your surgery date, you could consider bulk buying and freezing some items from the puree phase to make it easier for you after surgery.
We'll now turn our attention to focusing in a bit more on protein and just discussing why that's so important for post-surgery. So after a sleeve or bypass, it's important to ensure that you're meeting your protein requirements. The question really, can you think of why this might be? Why do we place so much importance on it? So there's a few reasons, and I'll just run through them now just in a little bit of detail just to get you thinking. So first, it's going to help with recovery and repair after surgery. So protein's required in order to provide your body with the basic building blocks it needs for growth. It will also minimise hair loss and minimise any deterioration in your nail or skin quality. Those are signs that you're probably not getting enough protein. So there's probably going to be some element of hair thinning post-surgery with rapid weight loss, and maintaining that protein intake is going to help minimise that. It's also going to protect your body from using your muscle mass or your lean tissue whilst you're losing weight quickly. It's then going to help maximise your weight loss in terms of using the fat mass rather than your lean tissue. It may also help to reduce the impact of excess skin through that retainment of the muscle mass, helping with your muscle tone. Additionally, it may also help you to feel satisfied longer after meals. In general, it's basically going to help you maximise the effect of surgery. So in order to meet your protein requirements, there's some set guidelines that we recommend people following after surgery, and one of those is to prioritise your protein and eat that first at meal times. So in case you can't manage your whole portion, we want to make sure that you've managed as much, or if not all, of your protein element of that portion. The element of portion should be half of what you're having, so half of your portion should be protein, in addition to your high protein snacks in between your meals. And these things can be gone through more with your dietitian and one-to-one appointments, and we can guide you through high protein options and high protein snacks. We'll also be talking about taking a protein shake for at least the first 6 to 9 months after surgery, and as I said, these details will be given to you by your dietitian. We'll guide you to which one to be using, but they're to supplement your food intake and make sure that we can hit those protein requirements, because you won't get enough protein from your food alone. Also, really to ensure that you're having protein through having regular meals, so making sure you're having enough protein by having that regular meal pattern. If you're skipping meals, having long periods without intake, you're not going to meet your protein requirements. So when you see the dietitian next, they'll be able to provide you with guidelines, as mentioned, and we can increase your knowledge around protein if that's needed, and give you some pointers.
The priority in protein can be seen here in an example portion plate post-surgery. The after photo demonstrates the volume and balance of food you might expect to be having at mealtimes after a gastric bypass or sleeve gastrectomy. The portion is made up of 50% protein, then the rest is mainly vegetables with a small amount of carbohydrate, and is roughly about a cup size in volume.
We're now looking at a plate model for the gastric band, so you can see that that differs slightly from the sleeve and bypass in that the emphasis isn't placed as much on protein. So there's a slightly more even balance between your protein and carbohydrate content, with the total portion being made up of slightly more vegetables. So hopefully these sets of photos just give you a better understanding of what to expect your portion size to look like and the proportions to be after surgery.
Next, we will explore the dumping syndrome in a little more detail. This applies to patients that will have a sleeve gastrectomy or a gastric bypass. So as we mentioned earlier, dumping syndrome is the term used to refer to the set of symptoms you might experience when eating or drinking a high-sugar item after surgery. If eaten, high-sugar items would arrive in the small intestine faster and in a less digested state, requiring the body to use a lot of fluid to help process it. This then gives a knock-on reaction or symptoms that can include nausea or rapid heart rate, sweating, stomach cramps, diarrhea, dizziness, pallor, feeling faint, or weakness. So some things to consider about the dumping syndrome are that it can be avoided by maintaining the quality of food and drink post-surgery. It's also variable person to person, but you can desensitize to it over time if you're regularly exposing yourself to sugary items. You'll generally need to lie down and let the effects wear off. It's also in your control as directly related to the quality of your food that you're having.
Okay, so now we'll just turn our attention to looking or introducing some of the main gut hormone changes that take place and are influenced through having bariatric surgery. So as you can see, we've got the three main hormones there on the diagram. The first one that we'll look at is just called ghrelin. You may have heard of this one. It's probably the most common one that gets referenced to. Lots of research has been done around this. It's the one that stimulates appetite, and after surgery there's lower levels of this circulating in your body. That's both with the sleeve and the bypass. So that's going to help you feel like you've got less of an appetite. So for most people after surgery, that, especially with the bypass, that happens straight away, and you may not really experience much of an appetite for a good few months after surgery. It will come back because the body does adjust, but that's one of the main reasons why you don't feel an appetite, because of that low level of ghrelin circulating. The second one then is the peptide YY or PYY, and that influences how satisfied you are after eating. So these levels actually increase after bariatric surgery. That's regardless of any weight loss that has happened or hasn't happened. So this means your appetite is suppressed, and as I say, will generally occur straight from surgery. The last one then is the glucagon-like peptide 1 or GLP-1, and this is a hormone where the levels increase after surgery, again regardless of any weight loss, and that's linked into potentially improved blood glucose control, and that's one element where people with diabetes can benefit from having the gastric bypass specifically. So that's just a brief introduction regarding hormones. It's quite a big area and there's lots of research going on into these. So if it's something that you want to know more about, just discuss it further with your dietitian and they can point you in the direction of some more reading material and discuss it with you further.
So we have some other key information that we need to highlight at this stage, which might apply to some of you more than to others. Firstly, it's our guidelines related to alcohol intake. So the evidence shows us that there is a higher risk of developing alcohol use disorder after surgery, but little evidence that will indicate who might be at risk of this pre-surgery. So what we know is that it will take you longer to become sober after drinking, and after you drink you would experience increased alcohol concentrations. Alcohol would therefore influence you quicker from a smaller amount. So our guidelines, the guidelines are currently to abstain from alcohol for about 6 to 12 months before surgery if there have been previous concerns over alcohol, but this will be discussed with you individually in your appointments. For others, we just advise you to keep it to a minimum. Because there's no indication about who might develop alcohol use disorder, it's recommended that everyone abstains from alcohol for life post-surgery.
The next set of guidelines are around smoking. So again, this may or may not apply. It's extremely important not to smoke any burnt products after a gastric bypass or a sleeve gastrectomy, and that's due to the risk of ulcers forming. The smoking guidelines for the pathway therefore are that we have a year of no smoking prior to having your surgery, and that's of any burnt products. This includes a 6-month period prior to being added onto the waiting list. So we'll discuss that with you in your one-to-one appointments, and make sure that we are conveying that message to you clearly. There is a stop smoking service here available at Chelsea and Westminster for those that are living in the Kensington and Chelsea area, or you can be referred to one of your local services via your GP. So nicotine replacement devices such as e-cigarettes or vaping are permitted, so they're a viable alternative if you are looking to give up any of the burnt products. We do encourage nicotine-free or low levels of nicotine in these devices due to the question mark around the effect of nicotine post-surgery. But we'll discuss this more in your one-to-one appointments, and please discuss if you have any concerns.
Finally, we will just confirm the requirements for supplementation post-surgery. For all surgeries, there is a requirement to take lifelong supplementation to avoid becoming deficient and compromising your health. This is due to the reduced volume of food consumed and alterations with absorption post-surgery. You'll be given a 2-week supply of these items from hospital, and then it will be ongoing via your GP. So what you'll have to take is, for the bypass and sleeve patients, a multivitamin. So you'll have to take 1 multivitamin daily for the rest of your life. You'll have to take calcium supplementation, so that's 2 tablets daily for your life. For vitamin D, it's 1 tablet per week for life. Then with vitamin B12, you'll have to get intramuscular injections every 3 months, and the reason that it's in injection format is that the tablets won't be effective post-surgery. With iron, it's 1 tablet daily for females having regular periods. Then for the gastric band patients, it's only to take a multivitamin daily for life. Again, these will be prescribed ongoing through your GP.
Okay, so now for the last bit of the session, we're just going to turn our attention to keeping going in the long term. So we're just going to think quickly about how to keep going in long term and setbacks, and how the setbacks are part of human life. We all experience them, and we as a team expect you all to have setbacks at some point. Perfectly natural. What we are interested in is how you're able to cope with those setbacks and get back on track.
So some common reasons for setbacks are things like trying to change everything all at once, so taking steps that are too big, getting bad news and not knowing how to bounce back from it, or having a bad day and comforting yourself in the way that you used to. But important to remember is that setbacks should not be taken as a failure.
So, as we said, setbacks are normal. So, can we eliminate the setbacks? Probably not. So, we can be alert to high-risk situations though, and over time we can learn from them, change our response to them. So, you may experience the same thing you would have done in the past, but you will be able to get back on track with things a lot quicker, so that the time it's affected you for is a lot shorter than it would have done previously.
So linking that in a little bit, how to respond to setbacks with self-compassion, because it's our experience that a lot of people on this pathway don't have a lot of self-compassion when mistakes are made. So what we want to do is you to be compassionate to yourselves when you've gone off track. So think about how you would talk to a friend who is having a difficult time. What advice would you give to them? What would you say to them? Think about whether you treat yourself with the same compassion, and why not. It might be helpful to think about what your compassionate supporter would say to you. So what would someone you care about say if you had made a mistake? What words would they use? What tone would they use? How would they support you? and try to use that information to be compassionate towards yourself.
So in summary of the idea around keeping going in the longer term, it's a good idea to think about developing a bit of a plan around if you were to have a setback. So with that in mind, you'd be wanting to identify your triggers of things that maybe have sent you off track in the past, and think about your responses to these triggers. What helps you get back on track? Identify these things in advance and plan these things out, so when this trigger does occur, you've got that pre-thought around what you're doing. Also think about what helps you to maintain these changes in the long term. As with the dietary information, these are lifelong skills that you'll need to maintain in order to make surgery effective in the long term.
Okay, so we've reached the end of the session now, but it's useful for us to think about what happens next from here. So you're all going to need to attend your individual appointments with the dietitians. There will be a further 2 group sessions when you've reached the waiting list stage. So the dietitians run groups to go through information to keep you on track, as well as additional information that will be relevant for your surgery. A lot of you will also have individual appointments with the psychologist that you're required to attend. We have an emotional eating group as well, run by the psychology team. So if anything that we've covered today in terms of emotional eating was relevant to you and you'd like to learn a little bit more about emotional eating, please let the team know and we can add your name to our waiting list. We also run a patient support group from 6 to 8 every 3rd Tuesday of the month in room 26, so that's on the lower ground floor outpatients. On our website, we have a list of topics that we cover in the patient support group, so it's a different topic every month. So have a look at the list and see whether any topics would be relevant for you and you would like to attend them. We're also starting an exercise buddy list, so for further information, please contact the dietitian team. So with this list, we're trying to pair patients who live closely together so that you can support one another through exercise. So go for walks together, go to the gym together, whatever you feel like doing. For more information on support services at Chelsea and Westminster, please go to www.chelwest.nhs.uk/weight loss. If you have any other questions or queries or would like to discuss further support, please give the team a call. You should have our information on the booklets that were given to you during your initial appointments. Thank you very much for taking the time to go through our session today. I hope you found it useful.